Okay, good evening everybody. I hope we've got most people signed in online. Our format for this evening is we're going to do a presentation by Andy Mawson, who's the Director of Operations at the Great North Air Ambulance Service. That will take about half of the session, and then we'll have the second half as a question and answer format. You should notice on the side of your screen that there should be a Q&A box. I'm not sure whether you'll need to click something maybe to get that to come up for you. If there's questions that you want to ask, if you pop them in there, I will then read these out to Andy as we go along. Now, the Great North Air Ambulance Service are a charity, and they run from the donations that they receive from the public. In the past, West Cumbria IMechE have donated money to the charity from raffles at our annual dinner. Obviously, more recently, we've not been able to hold events like that. As with most charities, their income will be reduced. So we're hoping that people who are attending this evening would be kind enough to make a donation to the charity. I'm going to hopefully put a link, if I can find it. I'm going to put a link to the charity into the chat box in here. Now, hopefully everyone should have received that, and like I say, if you'd be so kind as to make a donation, that would be great. Now, I think we can start getting on with the presentation, so I'm going to hand over to Andy, and like I say, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A section of the chat, and Andy will come to those at the end of his presentation. Andy, over to you.
Excellent start. Thanks for the introduction, Simon, and thanks also as well for just highlighting the sort of precarious state of charities at the moment. I do appreciate your support and also the opportunity to come and speak to you all tonight. However, I'm kind of sat in an office looking at my laptop and can't see any of you at the minute, and I daren't change the configuration of my screen in case I screw everything up. So forgive me that I can't kind of see you all. So yeah, my name's Andy Mawson. I'm a helicopter paramedic by trade, but also direct the clinical operation at the Great North Ambulance Service. And you know, essentially that means that it's my job to make sure that the service that the public support is available when people need it. We're really privileged actually to work over in Cumbria. We have a base just outside of Penrith, and it gives us access to able to help people in particularly challenging environments in the Lake District. And it's something that the team kind of really thrive on. By definition, as people, we're all those types that like to continually push ourselves, and the mountains give us you know, new challenges while delivering kind of critical care medicine. And I've worked for the air ambulance now for 10 years, actually 11 years, and I have a real affinity to Cumbria and the lakes and the work that we do over there. And the backstory to the kind of jet suit idea really was that I'll just change the slide there. That's our world, you know, over in Cumbria. And as part of what we do, one of the key things that we have to get right is really what we send the helicopter to. So requests for our service can be quite varied, but the skill set that we bring, you know, bringing the A&E department to the patient with blood on board, with emergency surgery and anaesthetics and things like that, it means that we have to try and target a particular patient that's going to benefit the most from it. So for example, in Cumbria, on a kind of sunny afternoon in August, if somebody falls and breaks their leg and the weather is fine and there aren't any major kind of environmental factors, then actually that's an injury that we don't have to get involved in as a critical care team. What happens now is that the local mountain rescue team will deploy, and these guys, the real guys and girls, are the real heroes of the story, really, in that, you know, they'll drop their Sunday lunch, they'll get to the base, they'll kit up, they'll run up the side of these mountains, and even with the best will in the world, it might still take them an hour plus to get to somebody's side. And they do an incredible job. But knowing that, you know, we're plugged into the 999 systems and we can see all of the emergencies as they come in. And as a paramedic and someone that loves to work in the mountains, I always felt a real kind of moral dilemma about the fact that, you know, our service, we know that someone's on the top of a hill with a potentially quite a simple injury, but actually that person's in a huge amount of pain and potentially quite scared. And that was really where the idea for the jet suit sort of grew. My wife's used to me kind of coming up with all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas, and about 18 months ago I kind of said to her, what do you think about using this gravity jet suit thing for getting up the side of the mountains? And I think she just kind of went back to her book and didn't say a huge amount about it at the time. But I started looking at the footage of the jet suit, and I am mindful, and forgive me, that most of the time I talk to a medical audience, and I have to remember that what you're interested in is the engineering as much as everything else. And it was probably the engineering that I was completely captivated by when you start watching the agility of the suit. And I began sort of in my own mind picturing it as a way to get to these patients that we can't necessarily send a helicopter to, but would still benefit from a paramedic attendance. So I reached out to Gravity probably about 12 months ago, and essentially sent them kind of a bit of a proposal, really, whereby our charity and Gravity Industries could potentially collaborate on what really now, by definition, is a bit of a research project. Can we use the gravity technology to get a paramedic to the side of someone on the mountain and deliver care really quickly? Once the idea began to kind of process in my head, I also started to audit and look at the times it takes us to get our helicopter crew to the really critical patients. And I know from experience is that if we're, say, deployed from the base in Cumbria to someone in cardiac arrest at the top of one of the mountains in the Lake District, the helicopter is by far the fastest option that we've got at the moment to get a team to that patient. But with the best will in the world, it still might take us 20, 25 minutes to get there. And that's almost futile if that person's in some kind of shockable rhythm and they need defibrillation. So I also then began exploring the idea that actually this isn't just about low-level injuries that we can't send the helicopter to. This actually could augment the critical care response by providing a paramedic in a matter of minutes that can then provide the initial interventions, treatments, defibrillation, some minor surgery even, whilst the helicopter's on the way. So we looked at data through sort of July and August last year, accepting that there was an awful lot of people on staycation and Cumbria was probably slightly busier than it normally is. But Cumbria at the minute is attracting about 18 million visitors a year. And what we found when we looked at the data and the injuries that were happening in the area was that actually this jet suit could potentially deploy to about 10 to 15 cases every week. That's more than the helicopter in some weeks. So we began to really kind of understand the need and also the injury patterns as well. And by far the most common injury is a leg injury. So, probably 60-65% of the injuries that we looked at was somebody falling, going over on their ankle, being unable to weight bear. And that's exactly the type of person that would benefit from rapid pain relief, a good assessment of the injury, potentially even manipulating the injury if there was issues with the circulation. And so we continued to communicate with Gravity anyway, and we started really getting excited about the fact that the need was potentially there. And all of the discussions then ultimately culminated in the trial, the proof of concept trial that we launched in September last year, which just went absolutely nuclear. The footage went all over the world. We were speaking to people in Australia, and then people in France, and then people in Canada. It went nuts. And I think one of the things that captivated everybody was just how, when I initially told some of my team what I was thinking of doing, the kind of response I got was, so you're going to stick a rocket on your back and shoot up into the sky and hopefully land somewhere near a patient. And it's, you know, when you see the footage and you see just how graceful and just how safe and controlled the flight is, by virtue of the technology and the way that thrust from the engines is vectored, it just became more and more, it felt more and more possible. And I think that both the Great North Ambulance Service and Gravity were actually surprised at just how effective it was getting up the side of a hill, because Gravity had never flown it in this environment before. They'd always just done a lot of testing over water or lowland areas. They'd never really flown it up the sides of hills. And the time saving is quite incredible, really. And from that proof of concept, the figure that we kind of publicised was that we worked with the mountain rescue team there, and they said it would take them 25 minutes to get on foot to that simulated casualty. And we did the flight in 90 seconds. So the time saving is pretty huge. I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So this is us sort of in action in Cumbria. And this just shows really that we're part of a much wider response to these accidents and medical issues that people have on the top of hills. The key, as I say, the key people behind, fundamentally part of the rescue, the mountain rescue team guys that you see in red. And what I think is nice about the Jet Suit project is that it fits very neatly into what's already a very established response, but doesn't either dilute or cause problems for anybody else involved in that response. So one of the other benefits when we were auditing the cases was that actually early assessment by a paramedic on the side of the hill might actually be able to either stand down some response that was coming and thereby save resources, or even step up care. So earlier activation of potentially a search and rescue aircraft if we needed a winch. So everything felt very neat. I think the test surpassed kind of all of our expectations. And I have a picture. I'm hoping that the animation bit works. It doesn't. Hang on. Oh. Forgive me for 1 second, sorry. This is actually a really great picture of the area that the footage was taken. And if you will, Simon, I'm just looking at you. Does that work with my cursor? You can't see the cursor. Okay, fine. So I try and describe it, but that big lump of geology that you're looking at there is essentially a ridgeline called the Band. And if you kind of look down at the farm at the bottom of the valley, and then you can pick a path that runs up the side, right kind of centrally up the hill towards the top. That's where the footage was shown, was shot. And so what we found is that the foot response, the mountain rescue team, and bear in mind as well that 25 minutes to get from the valley floor on foot up to the casualty does not include the time it takes to deploy, to leave the house or their place of work and get there. So we found huge time benefits. I'm just going to flick on to the next slide. So the first time I saw the jet suit in action, if you will, in real life was when Richard and the team brought it up to Cumbria. One of the things that probably underestimated is just how loud it was. I mean, I think on the day we actually drowned out the noise from the typhoons that were flying through the valleys. It's incredibly loud. In trying to pitch this towards you guys as engineers, it's actually got more brake horsepower than our aircraft. So our new heli, the most powerful heli that we've got, has a brake horsepower of about 750 bhp, and this suit is knocking out over 1,000 through the virtue of the 5 turbines. it makes my head spin to think about the RPM as well, because I think that's pretty staggering. But it's quite flexible in terms of fuel, so it will run on Jet A1, which we obviously have good stores at both bases, but we'll also run at diesel as well. It's quite a heavy bit of kit, and the dry weight without fuel is about 27 kilos. And the way that you wear the suit isn't hugely comfortable. Aside from being staggered at just how amazing the kit is, I was also amazed that Richard, the CEO of Gravity, actually carried this to the top of Stickle Tarn in the lakes on the first day of filming. An absolutely kind of Herculean effort that I'll always remember. And then moving down the kind of spec, you get into that area that's the bit that we've really kind of had to think about carefully, and that's the endurance. And so the suit itself hasn't, the projected time is kind of 5 to 10 minutes. What we've done is, for a safe zone, we've kind of put our maximum ever flight at about 7. And what that's forced us to do, really, or not so much forced us to do, but what that's led on to is some really kind of intricate planning around how we best utilize the road network in the lakes, but also as well different entry points using different valleys. So I'll come back to the technical spec and just pop onto, so you should be seeing a sort of what is an aviation map now of Cumbria. Now unfortunately, without the cursor, I'll tell you what, if I flick, struggling without a cursor, but for example, if you can all cast your eyes down to the bottom right-hand quadrant where Windermere is shown, and then just north of that is the village of Ambleside. To the left of there are 2 little yellow dots, and those little dots are actually just about where the band is. One of the most challenging hills in Cumbria is actually Scafell Pike, which sits in the lower left-hand quadrant at 3,210 feet. Getting to Wasdale Head, or a lot of the road entry points to get up Scafell Pike, would take quite a significant amount of time. But actually, we can launch the jet suit from the head of the valley of the Langdales and come in around the top of Scafell Pike, around the horseshoes. So whilst 7 minutes doesn't sound a huge amount of time, actually in the condensed area of Cumbria, where we see most of the accidents, which is indicated in that area, the purple line, actually a 7-minute flight time is viable. One of the really cool things that we're looking at is also the use of potentially radar-controlled drones that could potentially follow the jet suit with fuel pods. So one of the ideas would be that you could increase your endurance once, the priority being to get to the patient, treat the patient, manage the incident, and then have the ability to refuel via a radar-controlled pod. So that's quite exciting. There's a question which I knew was going to come, which is very mechanically minded about how Gravity measure the horsepower. I wouldn't even begin to guess, but if anyone's got any ideas from the participants, I'd love to know myself, to be honest. There's some wonderful footage actually on YouTube about the very early tests of the jet suit, and it's essentially like Richard stood in the back alley with a turbine on his arm with like a line into a fuel canister, basically blasting a hedge. So there's some really good footage about how the whole thing developed, and actually one of the earlier iterations of the suit actually had thrusters on the leg as well. Luckily enough, Richard's done all of the pain and all of the injuries in getting to the point where he's realised actually the way that this works best is to have kind of a tripod of thrust. So you've got the static thrust on your back, which is supporting weight, and then you thrust back to your arms. My first lessons in the suit, going back to my wife, she said, I've never ever seen you scared of anything until you fired those engines up. And I can tell you honestly, like I had completely underestimated what it would feel like to have that amount of power strapped to your arms. It's incredible. And essentially the way that you manipulate the thrust to achieve lift is essentially Richard kind of like likens it to sort of leaning on a bench. So what you're doing is you're using your body weight against the thrust and finding a sweet spot whereby you can either lift or descend. And it's very much likened to riding a bike. Once you find that kind of balance point, then it becomes very intuitive. And I haven't found the balance point yet, and I have had some quite embarrassing spins in it. So if we go back to, let's say, go back to the idea in Cumbria and that 7-minute flight time, what it kind of opened up the possibility of was actually, if we are in the right place at the right time, the band hill that we did the testing on stands at about 3,000 feet. Our casualty was halfway up that. So if you extrapolate that 90 seconds up to 180 seconds to the top, then actually we're at the top of a hill in a matter of minutes. And it almost becomes possible to envisage the ability to get a defib onto someone in cardiac arrest in that 8-minute window, which I think it blows my mind that this could even be possible. Because at the minute, and it's awful, if someone has a cardiac arrest on a hill in Cumbria, we go out with, obviously drive, but we know that those family members or bystanders, loved ones, are doing CPR on this person for 20, 25 minutes. And we lose that window where we can potentially save that life. This might change things, as well as easing the suffering of the bigger number of patients in the Lake District that just have a really, really painful broken leg, or suddenly become breathless, feel a bit sick, vomit, pass out. The medical kit that we're looking at will allow us to do a full range of paramedic assessments. So that's a full 12-lead ECG, so a full examination of the heart electrically, all the capnography and the oxygen saturations, and blood pressure monitoring and the blood glucose monitoring. We can do it all through a little Android device now with a company that we're working with, and essentially it Bluetooths the data from the monitoring bits onto the device. So it's really light, very accessible, very simple. We have a defib now in service that weighs 1.5 kilos, but there's actually a new one coming to market that's 300 grams. I've just picked up a question from Jim Furness, which is a brilliant question. What proportion of mountain rescues are at night or in poor weather where helicopter jet suit flight is not possible? I think that's a really brilliant question. I don't know the answer to that. Poor weather affects our operation more than it does the search and rescue operation. So the Coast Guard aircraft, for example, the big S-92s have some thermal imaging and infrared cameras that allows them to probably operate in slightly worse weather than we do. So the jet suit itself really is, in its first kind of trial, is going to be limited to good weather days. But actually, the bigger proportion of cases actually happen when the weather is good, because there's more people on the hills. And again, what it stresses is that this might be a kind of a bonus bolt-on to what an already established system. So in poor weather or at night, so search and rescue aircraft will be deployed, mountain rescue teams will be deployed. We're not necessarily solving that problem. We're just having a kind of another tool in the toolbox when it comes to the medical assessment and treatment. I know that hasn't massively answered your question, Jim, but I hope it's given you a little bit more insight. So, go back to, I'm just mindful of the time. Simon's got me on a very tight lead because he knows I'll just keep on gobbling on about everything. So essentially the stage that we're up to now is that both ourselves and Gravity are committed to the research side of this now. So the proof of concept has proven that this is worth a punt. I think the biggest skepticism actually comes probably from my own industry. And it's not lost on me that this kind of story has gone out when the NHS is in the state that it's in and people are demotivated and demoralised. But even the skeptics, I think, haven't raised anything that's tangibly going to cause a problem. In terms of our stakeholder engagement, we've got the National Trust working with us. Cumbria Police are really behind it. So we've got and you know, mountain rescue as well in some respects. The one thing that's the biggest question that's difficult to answer is the safety. The suit itself, an engine failure is a pretty difficult thing to deal with when you're just on thrust-vectored turbines. From a technical point of view, what happens inside the two sleeves is that on your right hand, you have essentially like a dead man's trigger. So for you to generate the amount of power that you need to lift, your trigger always has to be fully activated. So it's not a graded kind of accelerator on or off. Accelerator. It is just on and off. So in the event of an engine failure, essentially, your first action is just to release that trigger, and then you will spin into the ground. But the key point about the flight, and that's what I think the footage shows really well, is that we have ways up the sides of the hills where we can follow the bracken, we can follow the softer ground, so that if we do have an engine failure, then we're not falling into the side of a kind of cliff face, and we're falling from the height just above what you would fall from a mountain bike, I guess. So the safety is the one question that can't be definitively answered, but like we do in aviation and in HEMS and in everything that we do, it's just about risk mitigation. So the flight, the speed of the flight, the height of the flight, and actually the routing are the three big factors in how we mitigate the risk of engine failure. I mean, from an optimistic point of view, the suit that you saw in the footage and we've got pictured there is the Mark 1 iteration of the jet suit itself, and Gravity are already up to Mark 3. So they're constantly improving, how the suit works. And that's been accelerated by some military interest, as you would probably imagine. So we're committed now to really just to get that trial underway, and that trial really basically means can we train a medic to fly it, and then once that medic's trained to fly it, can they carry enough kit to be effective enough to get to a casualty in a more effective amount of time? So those are the questions that we hope to answer. And that'll be done in a combination of kind of training down at the Goodwood facility that Gravity have, and then bringing that training up into the Lake District. And then it kind of in my own head, it's going to culminate in a kind of live exercise whereby we as kind of the jet suit guys, we don't know where the casualty is going to be. It's all set up by directing staff anywhere in the lakes, and then we respond as we would do alongside the mountain rescue team and just measure it in that real world application. If that all works, then I guess that sets the foundation for ourselves and other parts of the world and other systems to have faith in the fact that it can work, and whether there's a place for it either for us in Cumbria or anywhere else in the world, I would say. And I think that's probably where I would kind of have a natural pause and open it to the floor. We've had another question again from Paul Fleming. Thank you. So the choice of fuel, does the choice of fuel affect noise and performance? Is diesel noisier? My intuitive answer is it probably doesn't, because it doesn't affect the speed of the turbines. And I think it's the speed of the turbines really that dictate the sound. There's another question from Michael Carlisle, if I just scroll down, who makes my scrolling is not doing very well. However, the engine is given by the Malcolm Woods. Simon, can I defer to you to come with some of the Q&A questions, please?
Yeah, you can do. Shall we show them some of the footage?
That's a good idea.
We have been trying to reduce the volume on this, but it's been a little bit unsuccessful. So we're just going to warn people. You probably want to turn down your volume or mute your speakers, because as Andy described before, it is extremely noisy, and that includes in this video clip. So hopefully we'll be able to get it to play. Okay, so that was just a very quick clip showing the suit in action. I'm not sure whether everyone will be able to see that. I've got a second laptop here that shows me what's being seen, and for some reason it didn't come up on that. So sorry if you weren't able to see that clip. There is a good video on YouTube from Gravity Industries showing the whole it's a sort of edited version of the event, which is really good to watch, so I advise people to go and watch that. What we'll do now is I'll go into some of these questions. We had one asking whether you knew who the manufacturer of the turbines was.
Yeah, both Michael Carlisle, thanks, and Tim Marshall. I am, again, very unprepared for a mechanical discussion. They come from, Richard's described them to me as microturbines that are manufactured in Germany. I'm not sure whether that means an awful lot to anybody, but they microturbines from Germany. I'm not sure who the manufacturers are. One of the things I tried to read up on, actually, there's a couple of good articles from one of the Gravity team, because the suit is actually, I think it's all now 3D printed. So I was hoping to come with some insights about how that would work, but there's a reason I'm a paramedic and not an engineer. And I'd probably direct you just to have a look around Google and about how they're doing it, because it's really quite cool, especially, as say, with the 3D printing side of it.
So another question from David Williamson is, how long would it take to get the suit to the launch site when needed? Obviously, it's dependent on where the launch site is, but given your little map of Cumbria and your zone of where the majority of your events are, would you have it based within that circle itself, in Keswick, for example, and then how long would it take you to get to anywhere in that area?
If I just pop the map back on. So if anyone's familiar with Cumbria, can I sort of direct your attention to the road that is actually the A595, which you can identify it by it's the upper left quadrant of the map, and it basically runs into Keswick. So if you look at Keswick, and there's a kind of a Y-shaped road that runs down south towards Windermere. Simon, does that? I'll look at Simon as sort of validation that this makes sense.
It's not the 595, it's the
592.
Yeah.
592. You're absolutely right. Where we're really interested in potentially exploring it further is basically having it on the 592 at a place called Dunmail Raise. And the reason the 592 is important is because it's really the only kind of north-south corridor that we can use in the centre of the lakes. So what we do from that point is southwest of Dunmail Raise are the very popular Langdales. So that's like Gimmer Crag and Stickleton and Harrison Pike. So that would probably be about a 12 to 13 minute road journey to get us essentially to the band, which is where we did the footage from. As I say, the more trickier areas initially when we looked at it was how the hell are we going to get to Scafell Pike, because Wasdale Head is almost a full anti-clockwise route around the lakes to then come in from kind of the southwest side of it. But actually, with working with the National Trust, what we can do is access the valley road that it's difficult to show on the map, but essentially we access a valley road, we get to the head of a valley and we launch to the east of Scafell Pike and then track over the top of the horseshoe and come in from the east. The worst case scenario, I guess, what we'll be looking at is about a 25-30 minute road journey to get to the kind of the northwest areas, like maybe Catbells and places like that. So where we've got a standard mountain rescue time response of maybe, say, an hour, 15 minutes, is still a considerable time saving. And the other aspect as well, and I think, the the mountain rescue team is a rescue team by definition. They may have a medic. There may be, for example, on that day, a paramedic responds, or a nurse, or even a doctor, but that's not guaranteed. So it may be that a team responds and they might have, limited is the wrong word, but maybe not the right kind of medical toolbox to successfully kind of analgese or manage a fracture or a break.
We've had a couple.
Yes, so essentially, and then the suit itself, the Mark III suit, is a digital startup, and it's about a 10-second spool. So the way we would envisage having the vehicle, if you like, is that the suit would be strapped into the boot, and you pop the boot and essentially just sit back into the suit, 5 straps on, and then a 10-second startup. So it's actually, time saving of that versus mountain rescue is pretty obvious, even with a potentially like a 25-30 minute road journey.
Okay, Andy, we've had a couple of questions relating to effectively the effect of the hot gases coming out of the jet suit, whether there's been any damage or scarring to the hillside, and whether there's any risk to the user or risk of fire.
Yeah, again, a great question, and I think one of the things that we suddenly realised on the day was just how dry the bracken was, and it was a question. So we did a little bit of arbitrary testing, but actually the heat dissipation from the suit, because you've got fairly decent forward speed, the heat dissipation is quite effective. And then for the landing, you're essentially flaring your arms sort of in a horizontal plane, so that you're reducing the effect of that lift vector. So actually, as you're landing, as you're coming closer to the ground, you're actually taking that heat away from the ground and moving it horizontally across, as well as, again, releasing that dead man's trigger. Probably one of the factors that we'd be careful about was what the liftoff, what the launch site was. So maybe avoiding areas of really dry bracken, but we certainly didn't have any issues on the day when we tested it. And there wasn't any damage to kind of the flora around. So that was quite encouraging, because again, that's a really kind of insightful question.
Okay, another one here. How many hours flight have they done on the suit, and is there any safety precaution like a reserve parachute?
The suit's been flying since 2017. I'm not sure if they've actually tracked flight hours, I'll be honest, but over the years pre-COVID, Gravity were kind of demonstrating in 85 countries a year. So they were flying the suit prolifically. They had, I think on YouTube, there's a couple of failures. I think it was Brighton Air Show, where one of them ended up plopping off into the sea by accident. And, backup systems, because you're wearing the suit, it is a suit, there isn't much infrastructure. So in terms of backup and safety, the only way that we can mitigate the risk is the profile of the flight, which is low, steady, controlled flight. That means that you're going to be maybe a little bit bruised and battered if you have an engine failure, but it's not going to be catastrophic. Just on that, interestingly, I think there was the point about the parachute as well. I actually thought as well, one of the best ways of getting down off the hill would actually be via some kind of paraglider. So just shoot off the top of the hill and then turn the suit off and kind of paraglide down. Because from a safety point of view, actually going up the hill is far more appealing than coming down. So we started talking about, is there a way to actually turn and actually track down the hill facing upwards, so that if you have an engine failure, you're actually ploughing into the hill instead of going down into descending ground, if that kind of makes sense.
You said that you chose soft areas for the flight path to allow for safer landings. Do you think it's feasible to do this for all areas of the lakes, given the amount of potential hills to walk on?
Yeah. So again, a brilliant question, super insightful. The kind of answer is yes. So like Helvellyn is, for example, if you picture the kind of classic horseshoe of Helvellyn with Striding Edge and Swirl Edge getting onto the plateau of Helvellyn, they're not really effective routes to use. But the other side of Helvellyn is actually, again, quite tussocky and quite gentle. So going up the side of Helvellyn, we wouldn't kind of track along the top of Striding Edge, for example. We go around the back of the hill and come up the softer ground. So what generally the hills can have kind of quite a steep face, which is a cliff that we'd avoid, but then around the back it tends to have a more, a softer track.
Okay, and a question that was always going to come up relates to the cost. Do you know how much it costs? And there's a question about the cost comparison with the helicopter.
Yeah, so it's really, cost is absolutely important. And so the Gravity are quite open about the fact they've actually sold 2 suits commercially. And they sold them for an eye-watering 340 grand each. But again, Richard's very honest about that, and that's not the cost of manufacture. What that cost was the cost of disruption to Gravity. And interestingly, the owners of those suits don't actually have them in their possession. They're actually kept at Goodwood. And if those people, and I don't know who they are, if they're ever in the UK, they might be able to arrange to strap in and go flying, because it was never his kind of goal to sell these out to people to essentially, in his mind, go and kill themselves with it. It's not really the goal of the technology. So in terms of cost effectiveness, because I guess we're early implementers, pioneers, partners with Gravity, we've not really bottomed out how it would work, but there's certainly no expectation from Gravity that we'd pay some kind of huge capital expenditure or investment in the kit. It would be more like a lease, and on those terms it's actually advantageous to Gravity as well to see the suit saving lives. They never actually envisaged it to be used like this, and it really created a bit of excitement among them all when actually potentially it's got a lot of military applications, as you can imagine, and a lot of interest from some of the sort of more specialised areas of the military. But none of them ever saw it actually kind of saving a life. And one of the really nice things that we've seen from some of the commentaries is that, especially on the tech side of things, so like publications like, I think it's Engadget or something, it's kind of, they took the track that they were like, we introduced you to kind of mad British inventor Richard Browning and his crazy jet suit. But actually it's not as crazy as we all first thought, because now the Great North Ambulance Service has actually got a really, really cool real world application that might help people. So that's quite a nice angle to the story, really, and one of the things that Gravity are quite keen on. So the cost effectiveness of the heli, so we equate, mission to cost maybe 3.5 grand, and that's everything from crew, back support, cost of engineering, maintenance, fuel, etc., etc. And if we have a very favourable kind of monthly lease on the jet suits, then you're talking a few litres of Jet A1 fuel, which currently we have for 33 pence a litre. So the cost effectiveness is actually quite incredible, really. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if I've kind of been particularly scientific about it, but if there was an expectation from Gravity that we'd have to spend 3/4 of it or £500,000 on buying a suit, then we wouldn't have got this far, because that would be kind of crazy. It's the fact that both organisations are committed to kind of seeing it work, that we'll find a way to do it. And again, Richard has openly kind of said, if there is this application for the suit, then it certainly wouldn't cost 340 grand.
Okay, there's a couple of questions here that are, I suppose, comparable to the helicopter questions, which is what do you think the windiest conditions that the suit could be operated in, and what do you use for navigation?
So the wind one, this is going to be a far woollier answer, because anyone that's had the pleasure of walking in the lakes can come around the side of one hill totally calm and then get hit by a kind of a hurricane. One of the advantages of the suit itself is that you're augmenting your own kind of natural balance. So when we've talked about that sort of side of it, clearly there'd be a limit, and I think probably the limit would be maybe the what would I call it, the threshold of the pilot themselves to maybe launch into some kind of into a condition that then they say, right, no, that's we're not. I'm not going to pursue it. In terms of like a wind speed for a number, I wouldn't like to say really, because it does handle wind very well, because really all you're doing is making very fine micro adjustments which happen very naturally in your own mind. So once you've got that sweet point of balance with the thrust vectors, actually kind of external influences from wind, you're already making micro corrections for your flight path itself. So your brain just continues subconsciously to make adjustments for the wind. So I'm not hugely worried about relatively sort of moderate levels of wind for that reason. The second question was navigation. So there's already a heads-up display system within one of the suits that Gravity use, and at the minute it displays RPM. One of our plans, we have we built our own kind of clinical database at the service at GNAAS, and one of the ideas is to actually, through GPS, connect a waypoint marker and the heads-up display to the casualty location, and essentially during the blue light portion of the journey, or if you were launching from the car anyway, you'd have maybe a minute or two just to. We know the lakes fairly well anyway. Local knowledge is key in this, really. So that's vital. But a digital waypoint system with a kind of a sort of compass marker, if you will, is the way that we're going to do it, and we're going to integrate it with software that we already use, so that when an incident's logged in our digital system, it will then be able to communicate that waypoint to the helmet.
And we've had AI or versions. Your first equipment could be transported paramedic up and down.
Yeah, and I think there's parts of the world now that are looking at this in cities, kind of drones coming in and dropping defibs and things like that. But I think what you lose with that is the clinical expertise. So where you could drop an automatic defib to a member of the public and they apply it and follow the instructions, actually there are more nuanced ways of using the defibrillator. So particular body types, for example, actually benefit from like an anterior-posterior placement of the defibrillation pads. So yes, whilst drones would get first aid kit to people to use, there's a real raft of things that we could do as paramedics that would be more sort of beneficial.
You spoke earlier about the fact that the heat dissipates quite quickly when you're travelling. Someone's asked, if there was a fall to the ground, is there a risk of injury from the heat from the microturbines, or are they quite well insulated so that if you did contact one, you wouldn't hurt yourself?
Again, great question. So the sleeve, I think it's a titanium sleeve that you wear, has, I would say, probably would sustain a reasonable fall even onto the engines themselves, and it would continue to protect even if maybe the struts that the turbine sits on broke. So because your arm's in that sleeve anyway, the chances of contact in the turbines are slim. Probably one of the biggest risks, I would say, in thinking about the sort of centrifugal effect of an engine failure would be kind of landing on the turbine. But because your arms are outstretched anyway, then naturally the way that you would probably fall would protect you from the turbines hitting your front. But I think you're right. There is an inherent risk in what we're doing. What I can't say to any of you is this is absolutely safe. That would be something that we couldn't kind of stand by.
And do you know if there's been other air ambulance services? A question whether we might be able to see it appear in the Yorkshire Dales, for example.
Well, this is, again, good question. Interestingly, as part of our kind of COVID response, we have a call every 2 weeks with all of the other ops directors. And one of them that operates down in Essex and Hearts, of all places, keeps getting asked by his crew and volunteers and staff when they're getting them. And obviously Essex and Hearts is pretty flat. So I haven't really got the geography that lends itself to jet suits very well. I think the thing with the Yorkshire Dales as well is it's another huge area, but just not as condensed as it is in Cumbria. So I think in our heads we're thinking about more condensed areas, like for example ski resorts, maybe Base Camp Everest, those kind of really kind of concentrated areas where you're not having to do a really prolonged road journey, because then you're eating into your time benefit. So the longer you spend on the road, the more your time benefit is being reduced. I think the key areas really in the UK is going to be Scotland and Wales. Those are probably more akin to how things are in Cumbria.
Okay, there's a couple of questions about training and the people who are actually going to be operating it. There's a question about whether it could be seen as going to the mountain rescue teams so that they're available in various areas. How long the training times are likely to be, and are there any physical requirements? And is there a long queue of medics wanting to train to do this? Well,
medics are very polarised by this. They either desperately want to do it or they wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. There's very few grey areas. And yeah, I mean, I think the interest is like, I don't want it to kind of. It's hard to say that the technology it's the technology that's cool, but what we're doing is kind of isn't that revolutionary. So like a solo paramedic response is kind of embedded in every single developed healthcare system in the world, whether that's them travelling by rapid response car or bicycle or motorbike. This is just using a different vehicle. So its application for mountain rescue is more limited because, again, by definition, mountain rescue are about moving people off the hill safely, not providing immediate medical care. So I think the purpose of the mountain rescue team is a team response to manage, package, extricate, and then move the patient off the hill, whereas this is about getting the skills of the paramedic very early on in that patient's journey. And by virtue of working on the HEMS, it means that our skills are probably more sort of advanced than road crews are. So we can use more drugs, we can do surgical techniques, we have a better, probably a more extensive range of treatments that we can give. So I think it probably is the reserve of probably the medical response rather than the rescue response. But interestingly, there's advancements now in kind of drone technology, and there's people looking at kind of 2-man drones. That's probably more applicable for mountain rescue because you could stick a stretcher on it and you can get 2 people up and get someone packaged in that respect. But the jet suit, I think, is more about the medical side of things, I would say.
And do you have to be fairly physically fit? I've seen some videos of Richard, and I believe he's fairly physically fit guy, isn't he?
He's stupidly fit. He annoys me. But no, I mean, interestingly, actually, the people that actually do better first time out are often sort of reporters that aren't necessarily very physical, and it's because when I think the more physical you are, the more you try and resist the suit, and it's actually easier just to be very relaxed with it. So there's no real physical limitations with it at all. And then in terms of how the training would work, there's a rig at Goodwood where you're strapped on by a rope. And you kind of just take these kind of little baby jumps hopping around, a little bit like kind of Neil Armstrong on the moon, where you're jumping a little bit farther than you normally would because you've got a little bit of thrust on your arms. And then once you sort of get a feel for where that power is and how to balance against it, then you kind of move into really what's essential is being able to kind of get off the ground and stay in one place. So you then move on the tether into kind of a hover. And then once you can hover, then you can start to move around the rig itself on the rope. And then once you're comfortable with that, then you move on to water. So a lot of the stuff is then done over water, so you can really start exploring how to move faster. What I should have said actually as well when I was talking about the sleeves, on that right-hand side, you've got the dead man switch. On the left-hand side, you've got a rocker switch, which essentially is a 30-stage increase of power. So for every time you increase the power, you generate 1 more kilogram of thrust. So a lot of the early stuff is just feeling that rocker switch once your power's on through the trigger on the right-hand side, it's binary. Once it's on, it's on. So you also get a feel for the rocker switch as well and how that sort of brings you up and down. So what we envisage is a week at Goodwood on the tether over water and then slow flights over land, and then move it into the kind of real world environment of the lakes for at least another week. So at a minimum, it's 2 weeks of intensive training.
Okay. I think that's most of the questions answered there, Andy. That's been absolutely fantastic. Really good to hear from someone who's been involved in this project, which is quite exciting. And I look forward to spotting someone flying around the fells and I'm out walking there one weekend.
You'll hear us before you see us.
Just before I thank everyone and we sign off, I've got Leia, who's from the Great North Air Ambulance Service, who just wanted to have a minute or two discussing possible opportunities for people in the area or businesses. So Leia, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Andy, that was really interesting and informative.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you for your time tonight, and also thank you to the Institution of Mechanical Engineers for having us. And we hope that everyone found it useful. I certainly did. Just to introduce myself, as Simon said, I'm Leah, and I work in corporate support for the charity. I really want to say that I appreciate that this session has been run as a fundraiser for us, as Simon kindly mentioned, and placed the link in the box for voluntary donations. So while our charity services team have been working hard to raise funds from home, our amazing crew have been attending missions throughout the pandemic, saving lives on the front line, whether that's in a city centre or on a mountain top. So like many of us, we have been impacted by the recent events, but anything that you can give would be greatly appreciated. Just to put that into perspective for you, in 2020, so last year, we responded to 1,262 calls for help across our region, and that's on average more than 3 times a day. So COVID might have impacted our fundraising ability, but it's definitely not impacted the demand for the service. I also wanted to let you know that we're launching GNAAS Business Club for professionals wishing to network, and Andy, again, will be our first speaker. So if you didn't manage to get your questions answered today, or wish you'd ask something or want to know more, then we'd love to have you join our free virtual session, which is on the 11th of February. Details on how to join can be found in the events section of our website, greatnorthairambulance.co.uk. Or if your business does have an interest in working with us in any capacity, then please reach out to myself using business@gnaas.co.uk. That's GNAAS. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Leah. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming along. Again, thank Andy and Leah for putting on a talk for us. As usual, for those who are regulars at our events, we will have an event in February which is called What is Innovation and How to Succeed at It. It is on the 18th of February, and hopefully I will post a link there in the chat section so you can go on there and register for that event. Again, as ever these days, it is another virtual event. I think that's about everything. So thanks everyone much for coming, and thanks again, Andy.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you flying around.
I also. Thanks very much. Thanks you so much, everybody. It's really nice to spend some time with you.